This video is sponsored by Conflict of Nations, the free online strategy game happening in a modern global warfare. Are you ready to take on the leadership of a real country during a global war? With Conflict of Nations, you're in control as you engage epic real-time battles that can take weeks to complete as you go up against as many as 128 other players. What units will you use against them? Tanks, jets, nuclear strikes from submarines? Or maybe you don't want to do battle at all. With Conflict of Nations, you're in charge of the strategy, choosing whether other players are your enemy or if you'd rather forge an alliance and take on the world together. Either way, as the country's leader, it'll be up to you to carefully manage everything from economics to technical research, since modern war is just as much about logistics as combat tactics. Infographics show viewers get a special gift of 13,000 gold and 1 month of premium subscription for free when they use the link, but it's only available for 30 days, so don't wait. Click the link, choose a country, and start fighting your way to victory right now. Negotiations are over, the weapons are on high alert, and World War III is imminent. Where's the best place to be, and which countries are destined to be destroyed in the biggest global conflict in 80 years? The answer is a little more complicated than it appears. To start, we need to figure out what World War III is likely to mean. The world has had plenty of conflicts in the last few decades, but they're usually either a powerful country imposing its will on a smaller one or invading it for a specific purpose, like we're seeing in Ukraine right now and Iraq in the early 2000s. There have also been thorny regional conflicts, like the constant border skirmishes between India and Pakistan, but none have exploded into World War III. And when it does happen, we'll probably know it. World War III is likely to involve two major blocks of nations around the world. On one side, we'll see the US and its NATO allies, most of Western Europe along with Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, and South Korea. India and Israel, both of which have strong ties to the bloc, are likely to work with them as well. Then in the other corner, we have the United States' two closest rivals for the superpower crown, Russia and China. While the two countries aren't in perfect harmony over Russia's invasion of Ukraine, they both view the US as their chief rival and are likely to work in sync if a war breaks out. China would likely pull its two nuclear-armed allies, Pakistan and North Korea, along with the ambitious Iranians who are looking to join the nuclear club. A small group, only joined by a select few other nations, but certainly a powerful bloc in terms of military strength. And this conflict will start in a familiar place. World War III isn't likely to break out from nowhere. It'll be the continuation of ongoing conflicts. The most likely flashpoint is in Eastern Europe. If Russia takes the continued supply of NATO weapons to Ukraine as a declaration of war or attacks a NATO nation directly, it would trigger Article 5 and bring all NATO members into the war. Likewise, if Russia wins the war in Ukraine and declares it Russian territory, then it might just view NATO's presence on its border as a provocation. And just like it did in 1939, the battle for Europe would begin. And when one conflict breaks out, others are sure to follow. Ukraine is to Russia what Taiwan is to China. The larger power has never given up the hope of reclaiming it even after decades, and in China's case, they've never ever acknowledged Taiwan as an independent nation. The chaos in Europe has created the perfect chance for China to move on Taiwan and try to conquer it without getting into a larger war, hoping that the United States, which has pledged to defend Taiwan, would be too busy to jump into the fray. Of course, if that gambit fails, we're likely to have a shooting war between the US and China across the Pacific Ocean, and this explosion of conflict could lead to more flare-ups. Would North Korea take advantage of China's move on Taiwan to launch its own assault on South Korea? Would the ongoing India-Pakistan border conflicts break into something larger? Would the mullahs of Iran finally attempt to destroy Israel and potentially trigger retaliation from the secret nuclear power? Who else will get involved? And who will be left standing when the smoke clears? First, let's look at who's likely to come away scot-free. The safest continent to be in the outbreak of World War III might just be South America. The continent is heavily dominated by mainstream left-wing parties and have friendly relations with both the US and Russia, so the odds are they'll stay neutral in the conflict. All these countries are democracies with the exception of the chaotic Venezuela. Also working in their favor is the fact that no South American country has nuclear weapons, and most have militaries only designed for domestic use. Not only are they unlikely to get involved directly in any conflict, but there isn't likely to be any motivation for a country to invade them. While it's possible they could be used as a staging ground for attacks to the north, there are much easier ways to attack the United States. Thus, the only thing South America likely has to worry about in World War III is nuclear fallout drifting their way if everything gets completely out of control. They're not the only countries that can breathe easy. Probably the most remote country in the world, New Zealand is in a lucky position. While it's firmly aligned with the Western Bloc and its fate is closely tied to that of its much larger neighbor Australia, it's more likely to avoid trouble for one simple reason: Australia is a pretty good shield. Australia is a massive nation that's closely tied to NATO and hosts US and British military facilities. While it's unlikely Australia will be totally destroyed, as it is a large country with a small military force, it could definitely find itself occupied by a foreign army. But would these invaders proceed to New Zealand? The answer is probably not. New Zealand doesn't pose much of a threat militarily and is one of the most remote countries in the world. If they didn't get directly involved, New Zealand might be able to ride out the war. And as Australia is unlikely to be targeted by nuclear weapons, fallout will likely not be a threat. And the same goes for a continent that's breathing a sigh of relief. For hundreds of years, Africa has been treated as an all-you-can-eat buffet by colonial powers, with almost all the countries on the continent being invaded, colonized, and looted of their resources and even their people. Today, they have a complex relationship with the world's great powers, but many countries are seeing their economies grow at an astonishing rate and other countries investing in factories and talent there. China in particular has seen its investment in the continent grow, with many key factories producing high-tech components used in military warfare being hosted in these nations. Africa has no nuclear powers, and its militaries are unlikely to get involved directly in any conflict. So the most likely problem Africa is going to face is dealing with rival powers interfering in each other's investments. But for other countries, prospects are thornier. Could the United States survive World War III? Well, they have a few advantages. For one thing, they're relatively isolated away from main flashpoints, which also allowed them to experience minimal conflict on the home front during the first two world wars. But this time, there's an additional threat: nuclear weapons, which means that the enemies can hit any country anywhere in the world. It's believed only Russia and China have the ability to hit the US homeland right now, with North Korea trying to join the party. The US is also very spread out, with dozens of cities dotted around the world's third-largest country. While it could sustain some massive hits if the war goes nuclear, it's well-equipped to survive. And if its survival is truly in danger, so is the rest of the world's. Its most vulnerable areas might be its Pacific holdings, including the state of Hawaii and the territory of Guam. And its neighbors are largely in the same boat. There's a reason there isn't likely to be any major conflict on North American soil. All of the countries there are relatively friendly with each other. Canada is a member of NATO and a close ally of the US, and the two are likely to be on the same side. Relations with Mexico can be a little chillier, and the country was famously approached to join Germany in World War I with the promise of reclaiming its lost territory, but it's not likely to actively side against the United States. These two countries aren't likely to be targeted directly during the war except in a full-scale nuclear barrage. Although Canada is uniquely vulnerable in some ways. That's because despite being the world's second-largest country, the vast majority of its population is located in less than 10 cities, less than an hour from the US border. And in the same boat is one of the ringleaders of the other side. China is likely to be a key player in World War III along with Russia, as the leaders of the forces opposing the US and its allies. But it's in a better position strategically. For one thing, the belligerent Vladimir Putin is likely to provoke retaliation from his enemies with big, flashy war crimes, while the ruthless Xi Jinping will be able to stay further under the radar. China is also roughly the size of the United States and is the most populous country in the world. If things escalate to nuclear weapons, the country will likely take some massive hits, probably from the US, but also possibly from India. But it would be very hard for its enemies to destroy the country without endangering the future of all life on Earth. The same can't be said for these countries. These are the ones that are in the biggest danger of being wiped off the map. We have to start with the most vulnerable countries in the case of World War III breaking out: Ukraine and Taiwan. If this global war starts, it'll likely start right there, and some might say it already has. Right now, Ukraine is turning the tide on Russia. They're supplied with heavy-duty NATO artillery and are shooting down Russian planes and blowing up their ships, while Russia is limited to committing indiscriminate war crimes with an army increasingly staffed by draftees. But if Putin gets backed into a corner and starts using nuclear weapons, the tide could turn very quickly, and Ukraine could see its largest cities destroyed in a flash. From there, it would be overrun, and the devastated country would become little more than a staging ground for Putin's next conquest. And the same could happen half a world away. China is less likely than Russia to use nuclear weapons against Taiwan, mostly due to Taiwan's small size. Such an attack could destroy the small island, but because of China's ambition to reincorporate the nation, it is unlikely. In order to do that, it would likely start with a shock and awe attack, hitting Taiwan with a naval assault, blasting through its defenses, and likely causing mass destruction as well as loss of power and access to resources in its largest city, Taipei. This would all happen very fast, and while Taiwan could likely hold out for a while, China has more resources and deadlier weapons. Unless the United States got directly involved and started firing back, Taiwan would likely still exist as a plot of land, but the nation, its government, and the people would become nothing more than a pawn and a hostage for China. Back in Europe, Ukraine isn't the only country in danger. Putin's had his sights on access to the Baltic Sea for a long time, and its only water access is limited, the odds are these small nations would be the first on the chopping block once Putin triumphs over Ukraine and World War III is on. All these countries, Estonia, Lithuania, and Latvia, are in NATO, but any pretenses of respecting that larger alliance are likely out the window at this point. Putin will be looking to reclaim its borders of the old Soviet Union, and these countries all border Russia or its puppet state Belarus. That makes them easy pickings. And the countries to Russia's south aren't any safer. Russia has long held that it wants NATO off its border, and NATO members close by would be likely its first targets. That includes Moldova and Romania. And in those cases, there's an extra thorny issue to discuss: a semi-autonomous region called Transnistria that is claimed by both Russia and Moldova. But Russia has long held that the region's residents would like to join Russia. Is this true? No one knows, and any referendum they hold would likely be conducted at gunpoint, just like the ones done in Donbass. But in the breakout of a larger conflict, the odds are that Russia would just march in, take Transnistria, and maybe even Moldova for that matter. If things went further, like the Baltic states, this would lead to war with NATO, as the next country in the region on Russia's chopping block is Romania, who is a member of NATO. But Putin is largely past the point of caring. In fact, just about all of Europe would be facing an existential threat. While Russia is gigantic, the same can't be said about any of its neighbors. In the events of a full-on nuclear war, most of Putin's enemies could find themselves suffering massive destruction and loss of life. Most of these countries would have key cities that could be easily targeted with mid-range missiles from Russia, if those missiles still work. Russia relies heavily on Cold War-era weaponry, and that means anything could happen. But if he lets the missiles fly, Germany, France, and the UK could all face annihilation, and so could the rest of the world. If Putin maintains a more measured approach, he would likely continue advancing from his earlier conquests, and that means Poland and Finland would likely also be in serious danger. But Russia has invaded Finland before, and the Finns proved to be more than the Russians bargained for. So, Europe's fate lies in the hands of Putin making the right choice. That's comforting. In Asia, it's a different story. China's military is newer and more effective than Russia's, so the odds are they'd take a different approach. They've been dealing the death of 1,000 cuts to many nearby nations already, particularly Vietnam and the Philippines. They've been taking over the territorial waters, creating artificial islands to serve as military bases, and declaring the entire South China Sea as their territorial waters. None of these countries are prepared for a full-scale war against a major power, so odds are they'd be taken over quickly in the event of a war, with China using them as a staging ground for a larger conflict. That would possibly inflict massive damage on those nations, but would be unlikely to destroy them. The same can't be said for another neighbor. If there's a country in Asia that's most vulnerable besides Taiwan, it's probably Japan. The strongest economy in Asia besides China, it's a key US ally, but it also doesn't have a particularly strong military due to World War II treaties. It relies heavily on the United States for its defense and houses a large number of soldiers and military bases, which makes it an inviting target for a Chinese attack. This would be seen as a 2-for-1 benefit if war breaks out over Taiwan. Not only would China be potentially kneecapping the American fleet, but it would be getting long-awaited revenge on Japan for the devastation caused by Imperial Japan on China almost a century ago. Could Japan become both the first and second country to be hit by a nuclear weapon? It depends on how much China wants to escalate, but it's definitely the most likely initial target for China in the region. And if China and the US go to war, there are a lot of countries in the way. What do Kiribati, Tuvalu, and Nauru have in common? They're all some of the smallest countries in the world. And they're also in the way if a war breaks out between the United States and China. They're part of a network of small island nations in Oceania, along with Vanuatu, Fiji, Samoa, Micronesia, and the Solomon Islands, and the Cook Islands. And if a full Pacific War breaks out, odds are they'll be quickly invaded by whichever country gets there first. They're closer to China, which makes occupation by them more likely. And while it's unlikely that they'd be hit by heavy artillery, these vulnerable nations could cease to exist very quickly and wind up as heavily damaged pawns in a larger conflict. While these superpowers battle it out and smaller nations hang in the balance, some other countries might be in serious danger from local enemies. There's another country that plays a host to a huge number of US troops and bases, South Korea, which has heavily relied on the US for its defense since the Korean War armistice. But unlike its enemy North Korea, it doesn't have nuclear weapons. As a key ally to the US, it would be seen as an enemy to China, but they're unlikely to attack it directly. That would be seen as a massive escalation by the US and likely trigger an attack on the mainland if its military bases like the massive Camp Humphreys were hit. But bad news for South Korea is China doesn't have to attack them. China is one of the few countries that maintains good relations with the Hermit Kingdom of North Korea, and they try their best to keep the unpredictable Kim Jong-un under control. But what if they take the leash off and say, "Go to town"? That would be an effective way to keep South Korea occupied while they go after US interests. But things could get out of control very quickly. Both Koreas are small nations, and North Korea could deliver a devastating blow to its enemy by using its short-range nuclear weapons to wipe Seoul off the map, clearing the way for an invasion into a destabilized country. But they might get more than they counted on. For one thing, using nuclear weapons on their close neighbor might lead to significant fallout hitting North Korea. But more dangerously, North Korea would immediately become a top target for the US and likely to be targeted with massive bombing raids if not nuclear retaliation. It's very likely that if a full-on conflict between the two Koreas broke out in the middle of World War III, neither country would be in functioning shape by the time it was over, which would make the entire region highly vulnerable to a quiet Chinese takeover from their northern border. And to the south, another conflict could spiral completely out of control. Unlike North and South Korea, neither India nor Pakistan have unstable governments or leaders, and both are fairly even in military strength and nuclear arsenal. That might keep both at bay, as the Kashmir border conflict stays on a low boil even as India backs America's alliance and Pakistan backs China's. But there's no guarantee of that. We've seen deadly border conflicts in recent years, and cooler heads usually prevail. But would the same hold when all countries all over the world are being brutally bombed? Or would one of the powers decide now is the time to settle the conflict permanently? The two countries are neighbors, and while they're both large countries, a large-scale nuclear conflict could likely bring fallout into both nations. They're also densely populated. Both are in the top 10 most populated nations, with India in the cusp of first place, so any conflict would come with massive loss of life. The case scenario, if a conflict breaks out, is that both countries would stick to conventional weapons, resulting in a conflict full of death and destruction, but without the earth-shaking weapons that could turn both countries into wastelands. But if one reckless leader crosses the line, it could result in a chain of events that would lead to more death than we've ever seen before. And in the aftermath, the odds are good that China would sweep into the region just like it would in Korea. Would another potential flashpoint blow up in the Near East? It's questionable whether Israel will even directly get involved in World War III, but it may not have a choice. The small Mediterranean nation is between a rock and a hard place, and while it would likely be firmly aligned with the American side, it might choose not to send troops to any combat theater. That's because it tries to maintain good relations with Russia, both because of the Jewish population in the former Soviet Union and because Russia plays a key role in Syria, Israel's northern neighbor. If Russia thought Israel was betraying it, it could easily unleash its proxies in Syria to rain rockets down on the small country and cause major casualties that Israel's Iron Dome missile defense system couldn't prevent. But while Israel might not be looking for a fight, the fight might come to Israel. There's no country that Israel has worse relations with than Iran, especially after the former president Mahmoud Ahmadinejad threatened to wipe it off the map. As Iran ramps up its nuclear program, Israel is on high alert to potentially attack its infrastructure like it did to Iraq and Syria in the past. But would Iran strike first? The current president has denied the Holocaust happened and threatened Israel repeatedly, so it might decide that a global conflict is a great opportunity to make its move. If it used conventional weapons, Israel would likely respond tenfold, and a new bloody regional conflict would kick off. But there's one deadly X factor here. If Iran was able to finish its nuclear weapon, or get help from North Korea or another rogue nation, it could attempt to hit Israel and wipe the tiny country out. Israel has a robust missile defense system, so there's a chance it could divert the hit and avoid a nuclear blast. But successful or not, an attempted nuclear attack would likely trigger massive retaliation, and Israel would almost definitely respond to a successful nuclear hit with its own secret nuclear arsenal, and it likely has enough to turn Iran into a shell of its current self. So if things spiral out of control, it's possible both Israel and Iran could face existential threats. And there's one more country in the crosshairs. We've talked about the United States and China, and why they're likely to survive World War III even if it goes nuclear. Both countries are large enough and stable enough that they could likely take nuclear hits and survive, even if it resulted in massive amounts of damage. The only way either country could truly be destroyed is if things escalated to a point where the survival of humanity was threatened. But the same doesn't apply to Russia. While it is the largest country in the world, it's also uniquely vulnerable in some key ways. Here's how World War III could lead to the end of Russia as a nation. While Russia has over 145 million people, it also has one of the largest metro areas in the world, Moscow, which houses close to 10% of the country's total population. It's the home of much of the country's infrastructure, which means that the world could respond to a Russian nuclear attack by obliterating their largest city in the blink of an eye. Their second largest city, St. Petersburg, has over 5 million people and would likely be targeted as well, and no city besides those two has more than 1.6 million people. Those other cities are scattered around the massive Russian landscape, and it's likely that if the Russian government were decapitated in a strike, it would be very hard for the country to recover, and that could lead to a devastating chain reaction. Russia has repeatedly threatened the use of nuclear weapons, but no one knows how many functioning ones they have. Some could fire and hit their targets, others could misfire, and some might not even fire at all or blow up in their missile silos. But as soon as Russia uses nuclear weapons, NATO and its allies will retaliate, potentially leading to world-ending consequences. And in the aftermath, Russia might not look anything like itself. Russia got to this size via conquest, and that can be taken away. With so many different ethnic groups in the country, it's likely many would want to take advantage of the chaos to take control of their fate. We could see a much worse division of the country than we did after the collapse of the Soviet Union, with Russia losing some areas to other neighboring nations, taking back their territory, and others declaring independence for the first time in centuries. And as for Russia itself, its fate might be familiar to another European nation. Russia would be held responsible for starting World War III, probably more than any other nation. After all, the chain of events started in Ukraine, so once defeated, Russia would likely be subject to harsh sanctions just like Germany was after both world wars. It would be stripped of its conquests and additional territories, and many of the resources would likely be seized to pay reparations. European nations would lay claim to border regions, and top Russian officials would face war crimes charges. In the aftermath of losing World War III, Russia would likely be a sliver of its previous self, under occupation, and with many of its ethnic groups no longer considering themselves Russian. Would there still be a country called Russia? It's likely, but it wouldn't look or act anything like the Russia we know today. Of course, then there's that other possible answer to the question of which countries would be destroyed in World War III. In the worst-case scenario, it might just be all of them. Thanks again to our sponsor, Conflict of Nations, the free online PvP strategy game happening in a modern global warfare. Get a special gift of 13,000 gold and 1 month of premium subscription for free by using the link. It's only available for 30 days, so don't wait. Choose your country and start fighting your way to victory right now. What happens if the worst occurs? Check out US plans for a nuclear attack, or watch why USA leaving NATO will cause World War III instead.